Awesome. Okay. So, those of you who didn't work with me yesterday for whatever reason, I got a couple nods. I'm Megan. Nice to meet you guys here through a screen. I am my job. I was hired by the district just for today to work with you, thinking about ways to really support independence with students, how to get kids engaged, how to get high schoolers engaged in working independently and applying things that they learned, ways that we can work with kids that doesn't feel like we're doing the work for them or doesn't feel like we're kind of taking over their learning, because they will look to us to do that. But what are some powerful things that we can do in our position in the spirit of student learning? And so that's that. We can talk more if need be as time goes. I put a Padlet, if you're just logging on, I put a link to a Padlet with resources on there, so use that. And let's just get started. Let's get rolling. We're gonna actually, I don't even think we're gonna use breakout rooms. We're a small group, so we're just gonna stick together and roll with it and take things where they need to go, okay? So when I thought about our time together today, and I think about teaching in general, and I think about the support of ed assistants, but also teachers, I think sometimes we go down this path of feeling like it's our job to get kids to complete an assignment or to get our students to finish their work. And yes, of course, that's one thing, but that's our mindset sometimes. We don't even mean for it to be that way. We're like, okay, I'm gonna, I wanna make sure that you finish this learning. I wanna make sure that you finish this assignment, but it's bigger than that. And I don't mean to be so lofty and in the air, but it can't just be that it's about finishing that one assignment, because what's going to happen the next time when they're on their own and I'm not there? What's going to happen on the asynchronous days? They're not going to do anything if all I'm doing in the synchronous days is being the bad cop to make sure that you finish an assignment. And I say that kind of, I guess, with a little punch to it. I don't mean it that way, but I just think as teachers, we can always be thinking about how we can better help students acquire transferable knowledge and skills that will help them, not just in this class, but in all of your classes, not just in this grade level, but in all of your grade levels, not just this year, but for every year moving forward. And I know that depending on our position, we might be working with kids for academic reasons, behavioral reasons, language reasons. There's a whole slew of things. So as I share this thinking, I'm sure there's going to be things that you're like, that doesn't apply to me. And you might think that and bank it, and that's okay. But also think, how could this apply to the group of learners that I work with? And since we're a small group, feel free to unmute and chime in and say, Megan, yes, or here's also what I'm thinking, okay? So yesterday we started, for those of you that were on here yesterday, if you weren't, I think most of us were at this point, but if you weren't, I started by just sharing, I'm not even gonna go to my slides. I started by just sharing the conditions of learning. And when we acquire all skills, anything you want to learn, I said to somebody, I want to learn how to play tennis. And I said that example yesterday, but it's a true story. I'm never going to learn how to play tennis unless I get a coach, unless I give myself time to practice, unless I get a little bit of feedback, what's working and what's not working, time to talk about tennis, time to think about tennis, and time to have access, or a racket that fits or clothes that fit. Maybe not the best example, but I think when we think about student learning in any subject area in general, and we think about any of our learning, we think about sports, instruments, whatever it is, the key is this explicit instruction. But I would say of this list, this is the most important part. And all of these other things come together, but you've got to practice. There's got to be time for practice. If you don't, we know this from an athlete perspective, from a musician perspective, from a teaching perspective. If some of you have been, doing your job for a while, you're like, oh, I'm far better now than I was in the beginning. It's because you've had more time. That said, this isn't always easy. And yes, this is the end goal, but it's not easy because, as I shared yesterday, what ends up happening is that in learning, kids are dependent on the teacher. We teach something and then we're like, go independently practice, go do this on your own. Or it's an asynchronous day and they're by themselves for the day doing this. Well, if they have no way to help themselves continuing to go, whether it be motivational or instructional, then they can't come back and be dependent on us. And so I think it's our job, especially as supporting staff for kids, is to think about how can we support independence with interdependence without hijacking learning, because kids will start to rely on you. By the time they get to high school, they are used to having another adult in the room for them. They are used to having somebody that they can come to, and that can be a good thing, but it also can be learned helplessness. It's something, I think of some of the kids you've worked with, that maybe since kindergarten, they are used to every single time they need something, to say, okay, will you help me with this? Kathleen, help me finish this assignment. Lisa, help me finish this assignment. And they've never had to engage in doing it on their own. And I'm saying that kind of broadly and not in a negative way. But I think this year more than ever, last year in March, it became very clear the students who were able to work interdependently and independently and the kids who weren't. And it's why many kids in our caseloads and kids that we work with kind of fell off the Zoom face, because it was like, I can't do this independently. And so, yes, there's different constraints, but if we can think about how early on in the year we can start to support some of this interdependence, it will take us a long way. In the spirit of time and just kind of rolling on, I'm going to share with you, I made this for you all, from a book that I've been using a lot recently. There's a book called The Distance. I'll grab it. I actually think, I never like it's worth it, but if you see it floating around, it's really good. It's The Distance Learning Playbook by John Hattie, and there's some really practical, good stuff in here. Again, never suggesting that you go spend your money on extra things, but it's helpful. I digress, because what I did was I took a couple things from in here and adapted them to share with you all, to have some tools and supports that can help you. Because here's the deal, and Nicole and I were talking about this yesterday. We as adults, we as teachers, all of us are learning right now. All of us are new to this. And all of us need to work on ways that we can help kids to be more independent. It's almost like we need our own little silent teachers. We need our own cues. We need our own little charts to help us, because we might not yet be in a place of feeling like we're really good at getting kids going on certain things. And so what I did was I created, and it's on that Padlet link that I shared. Somebody can reshare it if you didn't get it. But I tried to create a list of prompts and cues off of something that was inspired from that book. So this is like a hybrid of that book and then a Megan original. Thinking about what are some prompts that we can use and what are some cues we can give for learners to support their interdependence. And I'm just going to go through a few of them, and then I'm not going to read this to you, but then we can unmute ourselves and chime in for other things you're thinking as I go through this. Okay. So when I think about our role as assistants, and I think about really, we have this huge obligation to support kids in lots of different ways. It doesn't help to just repeat what already didn't work. It doesn't help to just redo other things in the spirit of finishing the assignment. If we want students to learn things, we need to think about the prompts and cues to get them rolling on their own. And so there's different types of prompts. And again, some come from this book, some are Megan originals, but there's the type of prompts where we can get kids to draw on their background knowledge. They're in high school. They've learned some of this before, even if they claim they haven't. So starting, instead of just jumping in and doing things for them and with them, to say, when have you seen this before? What does this remind you of? Take a second and think, what do you remember about this? Even if you've never learned algebra before, you've seen something with numbers, talk to me about that. We can also think about process and procedural prompts. This is huge. They actually talk about this when they talk about supporting ESL learners. If you look at any research around supporting language learners, knowing steps is something that's very helpful and supportive. And so getting kids to think in steps, getting our students, our high schoolers to think in steps, our teens, is very helpful. So, and don't give it to them necessarily, they can do it, but have them think, what are the steps? Depending on the kids we're working with, there might be a range here, but make a plan. What are your steps? Using a little if-then, make an if-then chart with them. If you get stuck here on this assignment, then you're gonna do this. So that when they go home and it's asynchronous learning, they have a little if-then chart. Like, if you don't understand the assignment, this is what you do. If you get stuck on the problem, this is what you do. But starting to use that language can be really helpful. Even having kids reflection, and this is just more the metacognitive piece. And when we think about reflection, this is trying to get kids to own their learning a little bit more, so in the spirit of independence. And when we think about reflection, this is where I like to get kids to be specific. Don't just reflect on this, but what do you feel best about? What do you feel least confident in, or most confident in, least confident in? Circle the problem that you are most sure of, your answer. Circle the one that you are least sure of. Even before you even do an assignment, find the place that you feel best about, find the place you feel worst about. Think about your day, think about your homework, think about all these tasks, and have kids think about ranking them and talk about it. And if they say it all sucks, some of them will, then how can I help you with that? Like, let's talk about that a little bit. Let me shift your language. So getting kids to just be more self-reflective and to help us with those things is good. I talked a little bit yesterday about a scale rating. I am a huge fan. This is something I learned in PD. I probably mentioned that yesterday, and it has been a game changer with kids and adults. I am constantly walking over and saying, okay, 1 to 5, how productive were you today? 1 to 5, how confident are you? 1 to 5, how much do you understand that lesson? It just is a way for them to do some reflection, and then you can jump in and do some support. When I think about the types of prompts that are more student directed, this is especially for high schoolers. Think about how independent they've had to be over years and how they will continue to be. But having them, you jot down something that would help. Having them look at, it sounds so corny, but the silent teachers, you don't have to call it that, but what cueing systems can you use for this? What is a teacher given that would help? Quite frankly, Google it. Which of these things would help you when you're stuck? Also getting to think through options. This is huge. And this actually is supportive of kids then with high stakes testing, whether it be the SATs that they're taking, tests they take for school, to say, here's 3 options, pick the one that best fits, or to have them give you 3 options. I do this with younger kids when they say, how do I spell a word? My nephews hate me for this. I say, you give me 3 options and then we'll talk about which one is most reasonable for how you spell that word. So trying to just like put that ownership on kids to have them come up with options and then narrow it down. We can start by, we give the options. So Robert could say, here's your 3 options. Or Ken, you could say, here's your 2 options. Which of these best fits? There's a game I used to play with kids in math, with my middle schoolers in math, called My Favorite No. And you give them 3 wrong answers. And you say, which of these is the best wrong answer? Meaning like the worst answer, and why? Talk about it. Those types of things will help students to be more self-directed in their learning. And then we've got the motivational prompts. You guys know these, but the key here is they're short. They're not 3 sentences long. They're not 4 sentences long. Somebody had me reflect on my teaching once, and they're like, Megan, record the number of minutes it takes, or the number of minutes you're talking to kids during their independent practice. To no surprise, you've gotten to know me over the past couple of days. It was a lot of minutes. So I try to not use complete sentences when I'm getting kids to continue. I just say, keep going, do it again, set a goal. This is a huge one for me. Instead of always using the phrase, especially for your kids in high school that have heard this 1,000 times, yes, but, or okay, but, that's the negative. That's saying you were wrong. That's saying my answer is better. And not that it isn't, but trying to use this language more. Yes, and, or, okay, that's one possibility, and what's another? So trying to use some of that language to get it so that kids are being more self-directed and motivated to learn. And then getting kids to understand how they can hit reset and continue on. And that could be by taking a break with one of us. It could be by teaching them how to do this on their own. I think the goal this year is to remind ourselves that anything we do in person, obviously it won't be as good when they're asynchronous and we're not in person. And I know that for many kids you support, it's going to be a different ballgame because they are going to get some supports. But if there's a mirror, so to say, okay, I did this in person, this is what it would look like, and you can name it for kids. So I won't be with you tomorrow to make this to-do list. This is how you're going to do it on your own. So to try and name out for kids consistent structures for that synchronous and asynchronous learning is big. I'm going to go through one more and then I'm going to pause. Lots of Megan rambling, and then I'll pause and we can process. But let's just quickly also think about the cues that we give kids. And again, depending on our position and who we support, this could go lots of different ways. I mean, there's visual cues, there's verbal cues, there's gestures, there's things in the environment. Sorry, scroll down here, right? Like those are the 4 different types of cues that I could give. Just a few, I'm not going to point out a ton on here, but when we think about visual cues, thinking about writing, instead of speaking redirection, write down the redirection. Instead of telling them the directions again, highlight a place where they can find it on their own. A couple other big ones. I think a lot of times students that we're working with have been used to teachers giving them organizers or giving them like, here's a huge scaffold for how you're going to write this term paper, instead of getting them to do it on their own. So the more, instead of instead of copying something and giving it to them that was likely found on Teachers Pay Teachers, just sketch something out real quick and say, look, this is how you're going to organize yourself when you go to do this, or this is how you're going to set that up, or this is what this is going to look like, whatever that is. But to try and just sketch things out, supports out, instead of feeling like you're having to go online and find all these extra scaffolds. And then the other one is whenever you are giving the students you're working with some sort of support, and this is tricky for high school because there's so many different teachers that they're working with, but try and keep your communication with them consistent. Whether this be a color of a Post-it or a color that you type on in a doc, but whatever it is that you give them for help and support, keep it the same color or keep it the same look or keep it the same format so they know where to go. When we think about verbal cues, obviously they're the prompts I just gave, but then the other one I want to point out here is to think about using synonyms for complex vocabulary and ideas. I will even have kids, so if I say theme, I'll say, okay, let's think about the theme of this. Let's think about the message. Let's think about the mantra. If I say, find the average, maybe I'm going to say, find the average, find the middle ground, find the place where when they're all combined and then divided out, that's what the middle is. So I'm using synonyms as to help kids really understand what I mean. This comes up all the time when we say, like, write an essay. They've heard that from so many different teachers, so many different times, in so many different ways. What do we really mean? Write an essay, write an argument paper, write a piece that supports a claim and proves it. So I'm not just saying write an essay and assuming they know what that is, but I'm actually adding language to that will give them more understanding. And then two other things, gestures. And again, some of this may or may not work for the kids we're using. Trying to not speak, it sounds so silly, but this is where the nonverbal comes in. Trying not to say anything, but instead like pointing, tapping, moving things to students can be really helpful. And then the environmental one, and this is tricky because environments are going to look different this year, and especially for high schoolers, they go to 7 different classes or 8 different classes, and they're all very different. But is there a way that I can create some sort of doc or platform for the students that I'm supporting in that subject area that can help them so that they have a little bit of a classroom environment? It's actually one of the things that goes away when kids get to middle school and they start to change classes. And if you think about it, there's some kids who still need that scaffold. They still need that support. They still need that, like, not that they need a primary cutesy elementary classroom, but they need a place where they can like look around them and find what they need. And now all of a sudden they're having to make this leap into, not all of a sudden, some of them are in 12th grade. They've been doing this for a long time, but thinking about like, there's a reason why those things work in primary grades. And then thinking about having kids move, and we know this to be true, but move them between the lesson as best they can in their independent practice. And that tends to help. Another thing, one more thing I've been thinking about, and this came up with the last group, is to think about, and thank you for answering each other's questions. And then I'll pause and we'll talk, and you'll say, what of this applies, what doesn't? You might say, Megan, move on. But thinking about scaffolding, and a lot of times students that you work with are used to scaffolds, meaning help, meaning like, do this for me, meaning give me that organizer, meaning like you write it out. Like you know what I'm talking about, right? It could be, there's lots of different things, right? That scaffolds could be. But remember that when you give a scaffold, and some of this is in our control, some isn't, there needs to be a plan for removal. They're not going to go, just as they're not going to go to high school as they were in middle school or primary, they're not going to go to college and somebody's going to like give them their graphic organizer that they need. I'm not saying we're doing that necessarily in high school, but I think about my brother, and my brother, nothing like throwing him under the bus. My brother was working with one of you all when he was in high school. He's my twin brother. And he was just kind of a hot mess. And I remember Mrs. Bogard helped him through senior year, and that woman did everything for him. Like his notes, I'm like, we're twins. I'm like, I'll take Bogard's notes. Those seem much better than mine. Well, then he got to college and he's up a creek because he doesn't know how to keep notes on his own. And so thinking about like, what are if I am giving support like that, if I am giving you the pared down version or the notes, or I highlighted parts of that text that you had to read for class, or I only gave you a snippet of it, to say to kids, look, here's the scaffold. I'm just telling you that, not because I'm making you feel bad, but there's a goal to get you to be able to do that on your own, right? So an example might be, let's say I take a text that a student gets for a class and I bullet point out some of that text to make it easier for them to understand it. This is a random example, okay? I might give that to them and hand that to them and say, here, use this for your paper, use this for your learning, use this, whatever. But if I can say to the child, say to the kid, the teenager, sorry, I was just with the younger teachers, but if I can say to the student, let me show you where this list came from, and I show them the text, here's how I did it. I pulled out the first sentence of each of these and I highlight it, and I just show them that. Not to make them feel bad. That way I've showed them what the scaffold is. And next time I say, hey, will you make your own? Just highlight the first sentence of each of these paragraphs, or find each place where it gives a statistic and pull that out. So I can actually name to kids how I made that scaffold, how I made that support, so that not that they're going to make their own organizers, but then that way they're mentally knowing how they can make that shift and leap independently. Okay. I'm going to pause there. We can have some real talk for a second. I know we all are probably in different, I'm making a lot of assumptions about what you all do, but we're all in different scenarios in terms of how we support kids. So let's just pause for a second. What does this make you think? What if this is helpful? For some of you that are like, that doesn't necessarily apply to what I do, but here's how could it apply? What are you guys thinking? Any thoughts, wonderings, things that this makes you think? In the spirit of scaffolds, I'll give some prompts in the chat box.
I mostly have okay, so with the whole independent learning thing, yeah, it's a great goal to have, that your students can learn on their own. I think I have the problem of where students aren't even doing the step where they're even seeking help. So they're not they. So I'm at most of what I'm trying to do is just make sure that they do know that they can come to me for help, or their teacher for help, because they're not even doing that circle of going to the teacher and then going back, going to the teacher, then learning on their own. They're not even doing that part. So I need them to come to me or their teacher to get help first too. And then I guess it's good. I do have some regular students then I can use to them apply then, okay, so if this person's coming to me now all the time, let's start working on how they can become that independent learner and start thinking of ways of getting them to be able to, to get that mathematical thinking so they can answer these questions sort of on their own. But I'm also, a lot of my focus is on, let's get students comfortable asking for help. And because I don't care if they keep asking me for help. I want them to keep coming to me for help. That'd be great. I am the resource for them. So,
well, I don't know that this is I've said this before. I said this yesterday. I'm not a magician, right? And I get there's real constraints. I also, so this may or may not be something that's helpful, Robert, but I'm also wondering, depends on the kid, depends on the scenario. But starting, and I'm sure we already do these things, but starting where it's you have to come to me, every time we meet, there's got to be one thing that you indicate as an area that I'm going to help you on, or, and that's not the right way that I'm trying to say it. It's a shift in our language, I guess I should say, to not let them get off the hook with saying, no, there's nothing you can help with. To say, okay, of these 3 assignments, of these 3 classes, put them in order. Which one was the easiest? Which one was the hardest? Which one do you need the most help for? I don't know how often kids are with us, and if it requires them to seek us out. We were talking in the last group about having a regular email blast with a kid, where every Monday at 8 a.m. that's when you're going to hear from me, or every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever. And maybe there's a set meeting that they meet with us. And I think the key would be to say to kids, look, every time we meet at the beginning, you're going to have to tell me a little bit about what's going on with you in your learning, and then I'm going to help you with different things. Again, just some things to think about. I'm with you. It's hard. I think what's so hard about it is these kids, a lot of kids that you're working with have been used to being dependent since they were 5. And so they've never moved into that independent part of that cycle. So it's been we're going on, 10 years now where I've been 12 years, 13 years, where I've been all focused up here. It's tricky. Other thoughts?
Megan, I think that for us, I don't know, I don't want to speak for the group, but I feel like our kids are pretty low level cognition.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of these things are definitely we can work with, but I think that's probably, we're absorbing it, but thinking,
Yeah.
I don't think they can get to some of these steps.
Mm-hmm.
They don't write essays. I mean, it's things like that where our kids
and I think that's where it goes back to, again, what's the progression? And it's not, and this is where it's tricky, right? Because we feel like then it's our job to get them to write the essay, but they're not even writing a list yet. And we're like, whoa, you know what I mean? So we're doing all this heavy lifting to get them to write the essay. And we're like, whoa, I need to back it up and just get you to write down 3 bullet points at this point. Or if they're not, some of them aren't even doing that, but what's the entry point then, right? What's if you look at the progression of learning, if you will, what's the entry point? And I think this is where it's a bigger conversation for all teachers, is that sometimes what we're being told the entry point is the same grade level expectation that everybody's doing. And I'm not saying, you know what I mean, but the entry point needs to be, no, we're not going to get to the full essay. It could be this, or this, depending on where they're at. Other thoughts when you guys think about the kids, and it's not easy. I am not claiming for anything to be perfect for all the needs of the kids we work with, but I think it's something we have to chip away at. And honestly, I think it's something our colleagues have to chip away at too. It can't just be that you all are chipping away at this, right? It needs to be, how are we thinking about this across the board and giving access across the board for all of our learners.
I think for our students that I work with, a lot of it was, even when you scale this back, they're not doing essays, but asking for what they need. So, or getting to class and knowing that they need to go get a certain binder, or, some of them would just stand by a locked door and just stand there, and they knew that the door would be unlocked so they could get their locker key. That might not look like anything to the average high school teacher, but to us, that was the cause of celebration when somebody said, I need help.
Yes.
So I'm taking what you're saying and I'm scaling it way back.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah. I mean, you think about the people, the teachers I was working with this morning that work with kindergartners. And I'm not saying kids are, but that's where some of them are at. Not in terms of but that's, and so what is it that gets what do I celebrate for a kindergartner to be independent? And maybe it's that they shut the door and I'm like, great, we got it. That's one thing that you did to be independent. Maybe it has nothing to do with academics, right? But first getting them to come and say, let's just practice these things that we can be independent in. I wonder if this could also be an entry point. I would challenge you at the start of the year when you're working with kids or supporting the kids that are you're assigned to or on your caseload, whatever it is, and to think, for this learner, this doesn't come from me, this comes from Peter Johnson in Choice Words. He talks about going through a class list and saying, what are their abilities? Even if it's a kindergarten ability. And I think it's let me name out what they can do. Okay. Even if it's as simple as they can move their hand to say hello. What are the things that they can do? And then working towards the next step off of that. And I think that that's easier said than done, because we also feel pressure to get them to not just raise their hand to say hello, but to perform at a 12th grade level. But what Peter Johnson talks about is and I will digress in a second, or I am digressing and we'll come back in a second. He talks about this experiment that he did with a lot of teachers, and he gave them a class list. And he said, on this class list, I want you to write down one thing that each student is capable of and one thing that each student needs help in. What did they all fill out first? What they needed help in. There were teachers, I've done it in PD with teachers, and I'm not saying but we struggle sometimes with kids, especially kids that have always gotten help, to name out what they are capable of. But if we can name out first that, great, they can shut the door. Now let's work on not just shutting the door, but what would be the next step to independence? First getting out the book that you need, then shutting the door, right? So maybe it's not writing an essay, but instead of me giving you this first, come to me with your plan, maybe just even a 1, 2, 3 of what you might write, or come to me with just the topic on the top of the page. Like, what is the entry point? And I think that's something that we could always be thinking about. What's the entry point for each student we're working with on each day? And if you can have that mindset, what's my entry point with them from a place of ability, meaning the entry point is what you are currently capable of. The entry point is not what the teacher is saying that you need to do or the grade level standards are saying that you need to do, but what are you capable of, and then taking it as our job to help them to be independent on the next step, not independent on what the grade level says that they need to do. Does that make sense? I think, and it's hard. I understand that it's hard and it's not easy. And I think, you know, in your roles, it's tricky because sometimes we feel like we can't guide the ship as much as we want to with that. And I acknowledge that, right? That it's tricky. I also think naming that goal for kids, not for all the kids you work with, you know, there's a range of kids we work with, but to say to kids, here's my goal. Like, my goal is to get you to be independent on one thing or interdependent on 2 things, or to say, my goal is to not just have you shut the door, but shut the door and get the book. And so naming that and even like listing it for them, I think can be really helpful. And that's how we can get less from the assignment driven. Let me just give you support to complete this task, and start to, I understand it needs to be a fine line, but start to help kids in a way that's going to get them to be more independent. Like, how great would it be if one time this year, a student is more independent than they were last year, or is interdependent, pulls out one sheet that they've seen before, and you're like, oh my gosh, without me telling you, like, celebrate. I think that could be huge. Other thoughts that you guys are having or applications?
Somewhat related. I mean, I think some of the biggest struggles I have personally is kind of balancing the parents. Like, obviously, like, we don't deal with parents one-on-one, like as an aide. But I think some of my biggest struggles is managing, like, knowing what a parent's expectation for their child is and realizing that there's just no way we can get there. Like, especially with students we see in general ed classes that are kind of maybe above their level of comprehension. And so just trying to, like, as a professional, manage those, like, all of those expectations, and like, trying to do what you're talking about, like, we can manage doing, I don't know exactly where I'm going.
I know exactly where you're going, Madeline, and it's hard because some of it's, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm like getting,
no, it's fine.
You're getting me to think about something, but it's hard because it's like, we're not the ones, we have parents who are like, write the essay, not to just keep using that, but we're like, look, like, that's not, and so we spend the whole time trying to get the kid to write the essay because the parent wants them to write the essay. And I'm like, I got news for you. When I'm not here to write the essay with them, they're not gonna be able to write it. And so I think that's a battle that can be tricky for us to climb, but it's an important one. I'm not saying to let go of it. I think that's a bigger system-wide thing though, too, as well, right?
Sure.
Thinking about,
sure.
But if we can name it with the kids, that will be a step in the right direction to say, like, here's my next step for you. And the more we do that, the faster they will get. I'm pulling up something really quick. The more we do that, the quicker kids will get at writing the essay. The more we go in little steps, instead of trying to go from here to here, yes, we might get there faster, but there's no way that they're going to be able to acquire that on their own, right? There's like little steps that we can go through. I'm going to share one thing that I think might resonate with you guys, and then I want you to think about how this applies to the kids you're supporting. I'm going off for a second what I was planning for our next little bit, because I feel like based on this conversation, there's something to be said for this. So when we think about student engagement, and I just mean engagement by getting them to participate in what we're doing with them on their own. And participate, I don't mean like, I don't mean, you know, I just mean do something, right? Like, engagement is just literally to engage with a task and to not be, not, you know, take a little bit of ownership. And so when you think about engagement, there's passive engagement, and that's a starting point. That's not a bad thing. Passive engagement is like, fine, you're here. You showed up to the call. Great, we're good. And then we want to move towards active engagement, right? Where you're actually like actively practicing something, whether it be one-on-one with Madeline when they're meeting with you, or whether it be in their class with one teacher, or whether it be whatever it is, right? There's also, though, active engagement that goes this way. And one of the things that comes up, and this is where we need to be reasonable in what our progression is. There's like a middle ground where passive can be more on the negative side, or passive can be more on the positive side. Stick with me. I know I'm getting like kind of lofty right now, but I think this could help. And just thinking like, where's the entry point? Okay. So when we think about this, well, passive engagement, so we've got kids that are just sitting there. The minute they start to participate, albeit a thumbs up, a thumbs down, to say hello, to show up to a call with Robert, you're like, okay, you participated, you did something. Like, I'm not saying participate, do the full assignment. I'm just saying do something, right? So we get kids to do something. We get them to do some sort of participation, right? It could even just be showing up. It could be answering a question, right? Another thing could be just to simple answer a question, as basic as a yes or no question. We're moving in the right direction. Well, we also know that passive could be kids that withdraw, and this is where it moves more into the negative. So withdrawing, right? It's not active, negative, engagement, but withdrawing isn't necessarily a good thing, because this is where kids are distracted. And this is also where they are physically apart from the group or separated from the group, right? And you start to move towards a negative slope. Well, then from here, we've got they're participating. It gets even better if they're investing and they care about it. And now they're not just answering a question, they're asking a question, right? So they participate, they invest. Eventually, and some of your students aren't yet ready to be here, but they might be in shutting the door. Maybe not in writing the essay, but they're shutting the door, and that's where they're driving, okay? So when we think about engagement, there's lots of different levels, and it doesn't have to be 0 to 100. At first, let me get you to just do something. Okay, you did something. Now let me get you to care about that something. Let me get you to ask a question. Now let me get you to actually take ownership over what your next steps are going to be. So even thinking about where are kids at in their entry point, and not assuming that they're going to get here, but if their entry point is here, what's the next step along this? I could keep going, and if we go down here, there's avoiding, okay? And when kids are avoiding things, it's not yet actively disengaging, but it's not great. And then it becomes disrupting. And we know that we work with kids where disrupting might be the case. Well, if I've got disrupting as the case, then how do I get you to just avoid? So disrupting might be distracting others, versus avoiding is off-task behavior. Avoiding is trying to actively not do the assignment, versus withdrawing is just kind of sitting there and checking out. Then after I sit and check out, okay, now I'll answer a question. Okay, I answered a question. Now I'm going to actually ask the question. Now I asked the question. Okay, now I'm going to actually name what my next steps are. And so I share this. It's kind of, it's obvious, but I think it is helpful as you think about the students that you work with, and you think about this goal of engaging learners, especially this year, and especially when they're not necessarily going to be right in front of us and sitting shoulder to shoulder and knee to knee. Thinking about progressions like this is just one example of a progression that I'm talking about, where it's saying, what's the next step, right? Another example of a progression, and then I'll stop and we can chat. It doesn't have to just be engagement. You could do, sometimes I talk about a writing progression, and a writing progression could be as simple from a little kid who's drawing pictures to drawing pictures and adding words, to drawing pictures and adding sentences, to writing sentences and then drawing sketches. You get where I'm going, right? And then once I write words and draw a sketch, now I'm just writing the words. Okay, now I just wrote the words. Now I can actually in a notebook fill multiple pages of words. Okay, now I can write an essay. We'll go back to essay that's more in paragraphs. You guys get what I mean, but it's saying in anything, whether it's engagement or whether it's in writing, what's the progression, what's the entry point, and how am I going to get this student to the next step? And even if there's things that are out of our control, if that can be your mindset as an assistant, every single time you work with kids, you're going to feel more confident in the help that you're getting them to be independent, even though it won't be perfect. But you will know yourself, like, I'm doing one little thing that's going to get them to their next step. Okay. Thoughts, helpful. I mean, it could be the case with anything that they're doing. And I understand that there's roadblocks, but just something to kind of wrap our minds around. Where are they at and where are they going? Any thoughts before I move into the next little piece?
Well, I'll offer a comment.
Yeah.
The other training that we've been doing this week is for Canvas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really looking forward to finding out how much our kids can do on Canvas.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of them cannot read, so that will be difficult. But for those who can read, I think it could really help them with their organizational skills, since Canvas pretty much organizes your entire school life for you. So
I agree, Lisa. And I think Canvas could also maybe help in those kids that we felt last spring who just fell off the face of the earth and we couldn't check in with them. Now, I know this means we have to get them to look at their Canvas, but at least it's one place where we can go, where we can try and check in with them, where we can try to have some communication with them, where we can try to get them to ask for some help or offer, just say, here's one thing that I think might help you, even if they haven't already asked. I'm with you. I also think when we talked about abilities, think about kids' progression of their abilities online. Some of our kids might not be cognitively or maybe their academic skills when it comes to certain academic areas are lacking. And I know this depends on the child, but then there's some kids who are really good at the technology skills. And there's some kids like, I can figure this out, you know, technology wise, but I can't necessarily figure this out reading wise or whatever. And so tapping into their abilities with that, I think is also very, very, very helpful. One more little piece that I want to just share. And again, I know there's things that are helpful and things that you're like, I don't know, but at least it's just getting our mindset in the right direction. Is to think about when people, and I understand this means that we have to get kids to ask for help. We have to get kids to come to us, or when we check in with them, we can follow a structure. And by check in, maybe it's like that one time where we get a chance to be synchronous in the classroom and they can't escape us. They asked to go to the bathroom and somebody said no, so they have to be here. To think about what's a structure I can follow to try and get them to be more independent in a very like low, simple, easy way. And I mentioned earlier that sometimes what happens is all of our learners, all kids, all high schoolers, all people, sometimes are in a room with an adult or somebody who teaches them. And, you know, all like when you come on, you kind of are like, okay, I'm not going to have to do the heavy lifting, whatever. I'm going to kick back. I'll kind of like, I always say like the dead fish, you kind of float to the top. Like, I'm here for the hour. I'm just going to listen. It is what it is. And I think kids do this, students do this, teens do this, people do this in life when there is an adult that they're used to helping them. They just kind of float to the top and wait till you tell them what to do. I'm not saying that I have the magic key for changing this in all students, but one thing I have worked on is to actually tell people I'm working with, tell the students I'm working with, the structure of how it's going to go when we meet together or when I help them or when they're working. And I even go so far as to say, look, there's going to be 3 different parts. There's going to be a beginning to our conversation. There's going to be a middle to our conversation or when I am helping you. And there's going to be an end. Simple, right? This is what happens as adults. There's going to be a beginning, middle, and end. And the way this is going to go this year, whether it be on Canvas in an email, whether it be me meeting with you in person, is that every time we check in together or when you're in the classroom and your teacher teaches you something and then you have to work and then you wait for Miss Mooney to come over and help you, Miss Mooney's not going to help you right away because every single time I come over, it's going to go like this. In the beginning, I am going to ask you to do some sort of talk. And some of our students might be nonverbal. So it might not just be talk. It might be show me your work. Some sort of like, me as the teacher, what's going to be happening, or the adult, I'm going to be trying to figure out how to best help you. I'm going to be doing some research, but I need to know how I can help you. I've even had success with walking over to kids before with a little like chart like this. And I just say, okay, what do you want to talk about? I just hand them this list. Do you want to talk about a goal? Do you want to tell me a challenge? And maybe this is too much here. Maybe I just put 3 things. I say like, okay, Madeline, I've got choices. Do you want to talk about a problem? Do you want to talk about your next steps? Do you want to talk about the assignment? And just wait. They won't know what to say at first, but give some wait time. And again, this depends on who we work with. But try to follow a structure where the student is they're bringing something to the table, even if that means that you're having to like pull it out of them. And I say that like, okay, so in the beginning, you're going to talk, because in the middle is when you're going to listen and learn. That sounds kind of abrupt, but like after you talk, after I see what you're doing, after I look at your ability, I'm going to know my entry point for that progression. Then I'm going to help you. But setting that expectation that when I come over to help you, you got to bring something to the table first, even if it's just showing me your blank assignment. Like, even if it's just literally showing me the blank page, I'm like, okay, point to where you want to get started. Great. Oh, you forgot the blank page? Okay, that's fine. Why'd you forget it? Where did it go? Okay, pull up that. Like, anything you can do, even if it comes up empty at first, it's going to start to create a routine. Like after a while, they'll start to respond in some way. And then in the middle, you say, okay, here's how I can help you. Let me show you how to do one of these problems. Let me show you your next step. Let me show you how to get the book out of the locker before you shut the door. And then in the end, there's some expectation that whatever I taught you, you have to try, and you have to try, and you have to keep doing it, and not just try once, but the idea is that I'm teaching you something that you can try over and over again for any assignment that you do. I'm not saying you have to like say each of these parts to them, but I think it's going to be a helpful structure for you. It is a helpful structure for me anytime I help kids, whether it's working with a kindergartner, whether it's working with an 11th grader, whether it's working with an adult. If I start first by saying, and I should have done this with you all when we started today, like if I start by saying, talk to me. Okay, what's your goal? What do you want help in? Maybe I should readjust my PD right now, right? Like how can I help you? Where are you at? What's your next step? What are you struggling with right now, Ken? Tell me. Let's say it's crickets. At least it was crickets. At least it was, you know what I mean? At least it was like, at least it was starting with that mindset. And then I say, okay, here. So since it's crickets, feels like we're kind of overwhelmed right now. So when I get overwhelmed, I start to think, well, what are the things I need to prioritize? I'm just making that up, but you know where I go, right? So if in the beginning I get you to do some talking, then I know how to best teach you. And then after I teach you something, there's an expectation that now you're going to get the book out and shut the door on your own. Maybe not to perfection, but you're going to get there a little bit. So I think as you go towards the year ahead, regardless of who we work with, if we can think about that beginning, middle, end structure, that get them to talk, get them to do something, even if it's nothing at first, get them to point to something, get them to pull it up, just get them to show up, get that starting, then give some space for that, teach something or say, here's one thing I can help you with, and then set an expectation that it's not just helping you for this assignment, but say, okay, so I just helped you with that right now, Craig. Great. For the next one, I want you to do this on your own. The next week they come back to you. I start by, Craig, how did that go? Show me. Craig, you didn't do it? Okay, let's talk about why. And you're not negative. I'm not saying that in a punitive way, but at least there's some sort of language where it's that mindset's not the right word, but that, getting kids working and then jumping in and helping them when they're probably used to having an adult come over right away and help them. Right? Think about all the kids think about the students you work with. They've been learning since they were 5, probably 3, probably 2, some of them, that the adult will always help you. Like, even our students, I'm one of our good family friends, Tim, he's got cerebral palsy. And I think about Tim, and like Tim has been so used to adults doing everything for him. And I remember when I heard that Tim went to college, and he went to college and somebody helped him get ready every morning. It was awesome, but he went on his own, and it was like, okay, like there's a next step. Like there's something you can do on your own, but he had been so used to people helping him with everything that people didn't even know what he could do on his own. And so I think that's something that I'm always thinking about. How can we figure out what they can do on their own first, what their abilities are, and then jump in with some next steps. Thoughts? Is that helpful? Even like make a little note for yourself that says like beginning, middle, and end. Like get them to talk. I put it on the Padlet. There's a little list that I showed you of like goals, challenges, next steps. But just get used to that, like beginning, middle, and end. Every time you walk over to a kid or help a kid, albeit for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. Okay. Is that something you feel like something we could take on and think about? So I guess 2 big takeaways that I'm hoping help, and I'm like, practice what you preach, Megan. Next time I will start with, how can I help? What are your challenges? What are your goals? But I think like actually 3 big takeaways from today. One, and I'm going to move backwards. Number 1, or I'm going to move in a different order. Think about kids' abilities. Think about every student that you interact with and where's the starting point, okay? And where's the, and let me name what the starting point is, whether it be from an engagement standpoint or a writing standpoint, but where am I starting? And then what's the next step? Not a leap, but what's one next step? And then after I have that, so that's one thing, is to focus on ability and then think about a progression. The second thing is to follow a routine structure when you work with kids, of having that beginning part where you're quiet and it's awkward silence. But in the beginning, you're trying to get them to do some sort of talk about their work. You're trying to get them to show up. You're trying to get them to show you something before you get them to listen and learn or teach them something and then try it. And then the third thing, for those of us where it is and isn't helpful, really thinking about our cueing and prompting. And I know this for myself too. I know it's like, well, first we got to get them working, but all of us, I'm going to throw myself, when I say all, could get better at saying less and getting kids to do more, or practicing just saying shorter phrases, even if they don't respond at first, so that we get them to start getting used to it not being somebody who's coming over and doing all this heavy work for you. So thinking about cueing, thinking about prompting that are little transferable cues and prompts and redirections and aren't hijacking the learning or taking over the learning for the students that we're supporting. Okay. Hopefully this gave you guys some things to think through. Feel free to stick around if you guys have thoughts. It was good to see you, good to work with you, but hopefully this gave us a little food for thought. It is what it is, but we all have abilities too, and we're all along our progression of learning. So name your next step. You know what it is for right now, and take it on and try it and see how it goes. And we'll be in touch. Okay. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Oops.
Thanks, Lisa.